From the early days of seemingly impossible levels to the players today defying the odds, the talent of Geometry Dash players is only growing by the day. But with Update 2.2 releasing in just a matter of weeks, that upward trend could come to an end. Today, we're going to answer the question of whether or not Geometry Dash has reached its skill cap. The first area of discussion to look at is how events have played in the past. Obviously, the game is still receiving a healthy dose of new extremely hard levels, but for the case of 2023, the rate of new levels being released in the top 10 has actually slowed down a bit. In 2022, there were not only 4 unique levels which held the number 1 spot, but in total, there were 11 new levels released in 2022 that would go on to be placed within the top 10 of the demon list, whereas through nearly 8 months of 2023, there have been only 4 levels released that have gone to the top 10. While that's looking very likely to change within the coming weeks, the circumstances for the dethroning of Acheron are only the first steps in a complete change to the demon list in its entirety. The most likely candidate to unseat Acheron from the number 1 spot on the demon list is Tidal Wave, Zoink's upcoming verification where they suffered a crash at 95% just a few days ago. While Tidal Wave is still ridiculously hard, its base gameplay actually falls short of some of the hardest levels today. Its key driver of difficulty is the endurance test. While Acheron as a level spans only 1 minute and 7 seconds in its entirety, Tidal Wave is approximately 2 minutes and 50 seconds long in terms of its gameplay, nearly 3 times the length of Acheron. If this were verified, it would instantly be the longest level in the top 10, while the next hardest level that has a longer runtime is the current number 12 demon, Limbo, which also relies on its longer runtime to carry its difficulty. The number of levels on the demon list that have a runtime over 2 or 3 minutes is very low, but it seems that creators are starting to catch up to the trend of longer levels. Many of the very hard levels coming up have very long runtimes. Levels such as Apocalyptic Trilogy, Ascension to Heaven, and Flamewall, 3 levels that are each taking a shot for the throne of the demon list, all have runtimes spanning at least 4 minutes. With these types of levels that span 3 or 4 times the length of normal levels, they're able to take the liberty of making the base gameplay more manageable, which not only turns the level into a nerve test more than anything, but it also makes the level more accessible to many types of players. Think of a scenario like Limbo, where despite it being harder than levels like Arcturus and Sonic Wave Infinity, the level has recorded a victor on a refresh rate of 144 Hz, an anomaly in the present day. It is the only level to record a victor on a refresh rate this low in the entire top 15. However, for a level to be both long and hard, it can't take that liberty all the way. For a level like Tidal Wave, that of which heavily relies on the wave game mode for the majority of its difficulty, it's just going to be viewed as yet another wave level that not many are able to complete. However, its length pushes it to be harder than anything created at the time. Combining extreme wave challenges with extreme length will certainly push the bar of what is possible, but another thing to consider is how far can players push the difficulty of the shorter 1 and 2 minute levels. Consider this, Slaughterhouse was verified almost 2 years ago, and today, it still stands within the top 5 of the demon list. The 1 or 2 minute levels that populate the top 10 have begun to stagnate in their difficulty growth over the past couple of years since Slaughterhouse's verification. Even a level like Tartarus, which was verified almost 4 years ago today, is still within the top 25 on the demon list. The boundaries of the shorter levels are closer to the limits, and in order to push it even further, you'd be looking at some rather unimaginable levels. A level such as Unnerved Silent Clubstep, data which contains multiple frame perfects on 360 FPS, which have a window of success of less than 3 milliseconds, is a good representation of where the difficulty is going to go for these types of levels. But attempting a level such as this would provide some unwelcoming side effects. Despite the capabilities of top players today, there's simply no way for players to execute timings that precise with a remotely high amount of consistency. A level such as the third variant, a level with 18 frame perfects on 360 Hz, would take hundreds of thousands of attempts in order to complete, but the mental struggle that comes with these high refresh rate frame perfects is simply too great. Even a level like Eternal, Riot's next and potentially last project in Geometry Dash, doesn't seem possible in the present day. According to Riot, there are 5 frame perfects on 360 FPS in its current state. Combined with the already difficult gameplay on top of that, I mean, just look at this. It's not too likely that something like this would be verified in its present state. Assuming what Riot said was true, then the choke points in this level could be too much of a deterrent for anyone to try the level. And if someone were to, it would likely take so long that it wouldn't even be a top 1 by the time it's released, due to its sheer unbearability. I'd like to transition into a type of level that hasn't really seen the light of day yet, but it's definitely worth talking about. We've already talked about how 360 FPS is what makes the levels more approachable for the wave and ship game modes, but there are levels that don't use waves and ships as their primary focus, with timings taking the reins of difficulty. There's a clear example of a level that attempts just that, with Minecraft showcasing a new level called Every End, featuring 7 minutes of exclusively cube timings, bringing the game back to its basics. Due to the level's length, it will still be an extremely difficult challenge regardless of the fact. See the trend here? Nearly every feasible level that aims to be a top 1 has one thing in common: length. While the ceiling for condensed difficulty is close to its limits, we have yet to see one of these longer levels verified, and that's for a number of reasons. Firstly, the levels are hard as fuck. but it's also that since they're longer, they take a lot more time to be constructed, so it's going to take months or even years for some of these levels to be released. Organizing projects of this length takes a long time, and decorating a level to the best it can be could be a multi-year project depending on the level. That's why we don't see many levels of longer lengths on the demon list today, although we could finally see a wave of these levels soon enough. Eventually, the difficulty of these longer levels will become normalized to the point where they can still have the condensed difficulty of some of the hardest levels today, while also clocking in multiple minutes of length, pushing the demon list to new heights. So while the skill cap may be close to its limit, we are nowhere near the limits of endurance, and with update 2.2 now being confirmed to release in October, it will be easier to make levels that hold long runtimes. Let's talk about 2.2's implications for the demon list real quick. In the new update, the base physics of the game are going to change entirely, with 60Hz now playing the exact same as 240Hz, making top level play more accessible to the entire community, potentially bringing in more players to make the stat sphere more interesting. It's almost certain that these changes are going to have a profound implication on top level play, with the game feeling completely different after over 6 years of no changes to the game whatsoever. However, there's a new archetype of levels that will be coming in the new update, with the introduction of platformer mode. This is a unique idea that could give birth to a completely new style of top level play, with these platformer levels essentially becoming a different game in its entirety, without any auto-scrolling present. There could also be a leaderboard feature based on time as well, for another reason to try and master these types of levels. But the reason I bring up platformers is that they won't be added to the demon list once update 2.2 releases. It's all but confirmed that platformer levels are going to receive their own separate list, making for perhaps a new type of top level play to add on to the traditional scope of play that we've been accustomed to for over a decade. Speaking of different archetypes, there's one more type of level that has just made a huge breakthrough in the community. Just recently, we've seen the addition of a new top 10 demon called Codependence. But what makes this level unique is that it uses the 2-player archetype, meaning you have to be 2 levels simultaneously. The reason why we don't see these types of levels more often is that more often than not, you're not going to have a second person to play the game with. But there are players who have the extreme talent of completing 2-player levels by themselves, and that was the case with Codependence, with Puckles verifying the level. I've got a feeling that this is just the beginning of 2-player dominance. If a level that's only insane demon difficulty for 2 players places within the top 10, imagine how far that can be taken once harder 2-player levels are released. Especially if the physics change in 2.2 fixes the dual ship physics, then look out, we could see a wave of 2-player levels put themselves in contention on the demon list. It's entirely possible that we could even see a 2-player level reach the number 1 spot on the list, as the concept of 2-player levels grows in the coming months and years. Guarantee that now Codependence is placed, it will motivate more 2-player levels to be created in the near future, which would end up having a fair population on the demon list later down the line. The skill ceiling for 2-player levels is far, far away, so it's reasonable to theorize that 2-player levels could potentially take over the demon list in the coming years. The hardest levels on the impossible levels list all use 2-player mode, so it could happen to the demon list as well, with 1-player level capabilities beginning to stagnate in the near future. With that, there's 4 unique types of levels that could populate top level play in the near future, so let's take a look at which path looks the most likely for the future progression of difficulty. Obviously, it's expected that platformer levels will have their own separate leaderboards, which does make sense considering that the way they play from normal levels is completely different, so it's best to leave platformers out of the equation for the time being. That leaves us with short, condensed difficulty levels that push the player to their limits, longer, more drawn out levels that test the player's endurance while also keeping the difficulty at a high level, and lastly, 2-player challenges that force the player to master their dexterity, performing high amounts of alternating clicks with no room for error, and if you break your focus, you're as good as dead. I've already discussed the manner that the shorter, more condensed levels have been slowing down in their growth of difficulty over the past couple of years, so it stands to reason that eventually, they're going to become less populated on the demon list as longer levels take over the demon list for good. Obviously, the rate that the change would happen is unknown, but it would take a very long time, perhaps several years. But eventually, we'd see the extra levels take a stranglehold over the demon list, and I could see the occasional 2-player level entering the mix in the near future, especially if Update 2.2's physics change makes the dual game mode easier to control, which has been a problem for 2-player levels for the longest time. Having this issue fixed could open up accessibility for 2-player levels, which could increase the demand for them in the near future. Overall, the landscape of the entire demon list upon 2.2's release will change entirely. As the community grows and top level play becomes more accessible, the number of hard levels and talented players will only grow. But one thing is for sure, the game isn't anywhere close to the skill limit and won't be for a very long time.